YouTube, I see you're with us today. All right, this very well may be the last of these type of lives until we switch on over to the show format. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So it made sense to make it an open Q&A. Just finishing off the technical stuff here. Bear with me. All right, that's it. All right. So there's still always about. Oh, it's actually raining. I think it's just drizzling. I don't think it's raining too hard. Oh wait, no, I don't see any water falling in the pool anymore. So maybe it just stopped raining. So there are standard questions that pop up around just being in Africa, living in Africa, what it's like, what are the benefits, why, blah 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 blah. And so, since this is possibly the last or the second to last of these kind of open forum lives that we're doing before we start the show format, which I guess is kind of like a podcast format. I figured we would go ahead and get into that kind of open forum Q&A, what it's like to be here, what it's like to do business here, what's the difference, blah, 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 blah. All those little questions that everybody always has. Let's go ahead and get into that. All right. Let me wake up. Actually, that's a good place to start. So, my coffee is made by the Ninja Lux Cafe Pro, right? The Lux Cafe, and really, I don't think at least any of the new Shark Ninja products are on the local market, right? So how do we get them? Well, the first one that we got, we just went on Amazon and got it, right? No big deal. Imported it, blah, 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 blah. What we forgot, though, is that we were American, right? And that going to our regular Amazon and buying something means that the power of the thing is wrong. So, the first one we bought like blew up. Like even though we had the transformer and all that stuff, and we plugged it in a little adapter because it couldn't plug into the wall otherwise, obviously, it still blew up like a fireball came out of the back of it, right? So those little adapter things, they're great if it's not a massive power appliance. So an air fryer, not gonna work. A convection oven, like one of the little tabletop ones, not gonna work. The toaster oven type, toasters, not gonna work. Maybe a toaster will work, maybe. Um, so those types of things that have like the heating elements that glow and all of that, they're gonna blow up. So, or the fuse in your little adapter thing is gonna blow up, one or the other. Um, so yeah, first one blew up. So that's when we realized that when we need stuff like that, we actually end up using Amazon UK, which if you have an Amazon account, you have all the Amazon accounts. So you can log into Amazon South Africa, log into Amazon Hong Kong, whatever, right? So if you have any Amazon account, you have them all. But when you switch to UK, then you get the right plug that they use here and set up for the right volts, which is 240, which in the United States we use like 120, right? So 240, big difference. Now, a lot of your appliances that have a box, right? They have a box on the cord where you take one half of the cord, plug it into the box, you take the other cord, plug it into the wall. That box is typically some sort of like step up or step down transformer. And typically you don't have to worry. There might be a switch. Take a look at the box. If there's a switch that says 120 and you click that switch over and now it says 240, then make sure you do that. But that's for things like computers, gaming systems, Some TVs have it, but the TVs would typically have a switch on the back, and things of that nature. If it's just a straight cord, then you may have a problem, plugging in. Now, if it doesn't draw too many, too many watts, then you might be okay. But that's where you get into that problem with the air fryer and all of that, where you can get the little converter and plug it in, but because of how much it draws, it's still gonna burn out, right? So things like that are little things that people aren't necessarily prepared for. Of course, it's not a big thing. It's a brand choice, right? Like I could get another coffee machine locally, right? But if there's something that you specifically want and it's electronic, then then you got to remember that different countries have different electric standards. So in some places, you move there and you just have nothing. Like there'd just be no way to get what you want. It'd be prohibitively expensive to import it. Even if you imported it, it wouldn't work because the power grid might be in such shambles that even the carrier of the electricity, right? So if it's 240 volts, that's one, but then there are watts and there are megahertz, right? So as you get into more delicate equipment, if the megahertz are wrong, if the watts are wrong, blah 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 blah, right? And so in some countries you're just shit out of luck, right? So that was one of the reasons why we chose Kenya, because they have the infrastructure to support like normal life, right? You don't have to worry about like crazy, weird infrastructure related things, right? Yeah, that's actually why I like Amazon, because they do duty paid shipping, right? So it's DDP. Yeah. So you do pay more. Like it looks like you're paying a ton more, but it's because the duty is prepaid. And so they just deliver it to you. Like you don't get a call from the docks like, oh, you have an import tax or a tariff or whatever. Like it just comes straight to you. And they overcharge and then refund later, which makes all the sense in the world. Like if you've ever been in any kind of delivery or logistics type of business, you know that makes all the sense in the world. Because the last thing you want to do is call somebody when their stuff enters the country and tell them there's going to be a 2 week delay because the duty has gone up or they forgot about VAT or some nonsense like that. And not only is there going to be a delay, but owe us more money or else you're not getting it. Like, no. Better to just overcharge in the beginning, then send a refund out in the end, which is exactly what Amazon does. So I just randomly get money deposited in my account from Amazon, and I'll look at it, refund on whatever. Oh, yeah, all right, fine, you know. But I definitely prefer the convenience of not having to worry about anything and it just showing up, which you guys have seen on the lives, right? Amazon coming to me, have to sign and blah, 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 blah. It'll just show up directly to the house. Whereas when you use other services, you might have to go to their depot and pick it up. It might not come to your house. It also means that there's an opportunity for people who understand logistics, for people who understand last mile fulfillment. There's an opportunity because there is no actual Amazon here, right? Amazon is using Aramax and Wells Fargo and G4S as like fulfillment, and DHL as like fulfillment partners. So there is no warehouse here. There is no fulfillment center here. There's nothing like that. There's one in South Africa, but there's not one here. So there are, every problem, if you have the proper mindset, is actually an opportunity, right? Some people, they have a complaining mindset. A problem is a problem. That's a fact. If it is such, but if they have a complaining mindset, they either complain about the problem or they strategize how to fix the problem. So if they have a complaining mindset, they'll just complain about problems. But if they have a solutions based mindset, then they'll figure out how to solve the problem. And if the problem is big enough, people will pay them for solving it, right? That's how business works, right? So all business is you solving a problem, and then, depending on the size of the problem, the society will reward you for solving that problem accordingly. So if it's a small problem, then you'll make a small amount of money. If it's a large problem, then you'll make a large amount of money. That's just the way it works in a nutshell. So when you simplify and uncomplicate business, that's all it is. All it is you solving a problem, typically for society, and then society will reward you in accordance with the size of the problem you solved. Yeah, no, I mean, there's plenty. You just have to have, like, I don't have expertise in last mile fulfillment, right? We've set up companies in it. That's one good thing about having a mergers and acquisitions team, is that as we do those types of jobs, we do mergers, we do acquisitions, we do corporate formations, international formations, and all of that out of the law firm. In order to do that, you have to do something called due diligence. If you do due diligence, you essentially learn that industry, right? Not enough to like go out there and decide that you're going to take it over or anything like that, but enough that you actually understand how that industry works, right? So like I understand how a pharmaceutical manufacturer works because we made one in Sierra Leone, right, for a client, right? So I understand what the pharmacy board is. I understand what the licensing is like. I understand, how all of those pieces fit together because I actually went through the process of building one for a client, even though that's not my business, right? So that's why your M&A people are always the most interesting people to talk to about business in general, and they almost seem like know-it-alls. And it's because the longer you do it, the more businesses that you're not an expert in that you've actually created, right? So you know more than like that person's kid knows. Like they know daddy has a company, but they have no idea how the company works. You are actually in there ripping the company apart, looking at all the financials, you get all the tax returns. Like if you're going to do an M&A transaction, you need all of that. So you actually understand how the business works, what the supply chain looks like, who the vendors are, all of that. Where the money goes, how much of it stays, how much of it gets paid out, what the taxes look like. You get it all, right? And so you really understand quite a few different industries and quite a few different businesses just by going through the process of being like an M&A specialist and all of that. So that's why when it comes down, like when there's strategy sessions that we do, and we're just talking pure business strategy, that's why I'm so tapped into so many different business strategies because of over a decade of mergers and acquisitions, right? So that'll really, that's probably the number one way. I know not everybody can get into it, but that's definitely the number one way to be ridiculously well-rounded in business strategy, is to be connected to mergers and acquisitions, of people who are doing like a decent amount, like, 2-3 mergers a year is decent. Like you'll get a pretty good grasp of a lot of the business world just with 2-3 mergers a year. Thanks for telling me that. I didn't realize the camera was cloudy. But now that you say it, it almost looks like this one's cloudy too. All right. I so I had no idea what virgin hair was before I did a wig company for a client. We did a international formation and a merger. So then like we got into all of that stuff. So I know a lot about that now. What else have we done that surprised me? We did a semiconductor acquisition and then moved it out of the country. into Singapore. So I know a lot about, you know, semiconductors and how those crystals are grown, and how crazy the process is. It's not even really considered science. That's how crazy it is. And the master growers fail 30% of the time. It's wild to see how they do the silicone crystals and grow the semiconductors and all that stuff. But I would have never known any of that had I not physically built the company and, you know, ripped an operating company apart. See, like startup people don't know anything because their company's not operating. They have a dream of what they wish their company could be, but it's not actually operating. When you do mergers and acquisitions, you might be dealing with a company that's existed for 100 years and that does, you know, 50 million a year in revenue, you know, and has, you know, 100 employees, right? So they're actually doing whatever it is they say they're doing. And so that's when you get a really good grasp of how that industry works. We did a ball bearing manufacturer in Brazil, believe it or not. That surprised me, but yeah. And actually, also kind of fun fact is it used to be owned by the Gracies. Like apparently that's where they got their actual money. Like to start UFC, apparently they were ball bearing barons, and they made all their money in ball bearings, not in martial arts. And then they did the UFC thing. Another fun fact: if you go back and check out UFC 1, 2, and 3, I learned all of this building this, acquiring this ball bearing company that used to be theirs for a client, right? If you go back and you check UFC 1, 2, and 3, you'll see that everybody that like the great Hoist Gracie beat to make Brazilian Jiu Jitsu so amazing, if you go back and you check the tail of the tapes, every single person he fought in that incredible marketing scheme, which is what it was before they sold it to Dana White, he beat them already. Nobody there was a real threat to him. So he collected all the people he had already beat up and beat them up again for 3, 4 years, and then said Brazilian Jiu Jitsu is the greatest. See, nothing can beat it, and created like a multi-million-dollar martial arts empire off of that, and then sold the, you know, the UFC to Dana White. Crazy things that you find out in mergers and acquisitions. So it gives you a look behind the curtain. Yeah, it gives you a look behind the curtain. Yeah, no, actually, I did. Actually, I did. I actually did go look up all his fights and like then look up their tail of the tape. And there's a fight against him previously for each and every one of them. So he had already beat all of them. Crazy. Hmm. You could. We never really do that. Never is a sometimes a trap word. No, no, we never have. But you could. So you could operate the company as a transition team on a merger and an acquisition, so that you know there might be the opportunity for you to do something like that. Um, but typically we didn't do that because our mergers were also typically not private equity mergers. That typically happens with like private equity mergers where the private equity is cutting up the company. So we never had to do that. But even when you do have to do that, you typically hire an interim who knows the industry. Like you don't do it yourself. Yeah, 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 yeah. I don't know, man. America was ghetto. Like I don't know what else to tell you. You know, oddly enough, the best time. Wow. The best time in America for me. Let me think about that. Uh, the Clinton administration, probably. Yeah, during the Clinton administration was by far the best time for me. Um, yeah. What about Obama? I spent most of Obama's administration in China. So, well, I guess not most of it, but I was there like when he was elected. I'm trying to remember. Was that the first time or the second time? I might have been there when he got reelected. Yeah. But no, 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 I didn't really see. I didn't really see an influx of like opportunity or like I distinctly remember seeing like opportunity influx during Clinton. Like I distinctly remember, I can't even remember what the business was, but like a business failed, went out, got a job, didn't like something about the job, like didn't like the way the person talked to me or something, I don't know, and like left the job, had another job the same day. You know what I mean? Like, and a lot of folks around had the same like experience during that time. Like, they didn't care about kissing their boss's ass because there were jobs and we can go get another one type of thing. So I remember that very clearly. So if you ask me within my lifetime, um, what the what the best time in America was is I would say probably the Clinton during the Clinton administration. Now that's just for me. That might not be anybody else. Um, I know like my dad really liked Carter. I wasn't alive for Carter, so but for me it was definitely Clinton, and he did a bunch of bullshit as well. I'm not saying that he was like the best president or anything, but the time in America where, you know, America worked the best for me was definitely during Clinton time. No one's ever asked me that question. That's a good question. I get asked a lot of questions often, so it's not often that someone asks me a question that no one else has ever asked. But yeah, that's a good question. But yeah, most of my life, even my childhood, like most of my life, America has been ghetto. There's a story my mother used to tell, rest her soul. Um, I think it was one of the first times like that I cognizantly traveled, right? Because like my son has a few passport stamps now and has been to a few different countries, but he's 22 months old. Like he's not going to remember that, right? So that I call that non-cognizant travel. Um, but like beyond the age of 4, when you like remember the trip and the da 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 da, right? So so I must have been like maybe 6 or something like that, maybe no older than 8, and we went to Bermuda. Uh, I think we went to Bermuda. Um, and so on the way back, on the way back, apparently I was telling like some like some enforcement agent actually as a child who didn't know any better. I'm telling them like, no, I don't want to go back. America's a prison. I can go on the beach every day here. If I go back, I'll be in the house. It's cold. It snows. Like, I'm like 6 or 7. So it's always been ghetto. That's always been my experience. I vaguely remember that, but that was such a hoot from my mom. It was a story that she told at every freaking dinner party. But yeah, yeah. I do vaguely remember that. Like I remember somebody giving me their radio. They had like the radio with the tape deck in it to like calm me down. So then I sat there playing with the radio. But but yeah. So even at the age of 8 or whatever, I was not content with the way America works. Interesting, huh? So why Kenya? Kenya was just the best for me. It's not always the best for everyone, right? But it was definitely the best for me. So what we looked at was infrastructure. What we looked at was learning curve as far as like local business structures and local, traditions around the things that affect your everyday life, right? Like we don't need to know anybody's like tribal traditions because we're not part of the tribe, right? It's not appropriate for us to even engage in that, right? But business culture, educational culture, social cultures, things of that nature. Right. And so the country with the lowest learning curve was absolutely Kenya. There's and not just sub-Saharan Africa, period. Like the country with the lowest learning curve in Africa, period, is easily Kenya. So that was a big factor in us choosing Kenya, because the longer you have to learn, the longer you're not making money. If you don't know how to do business in a place, the longer it takes you, the longer that learning curve is, the longer you're not making money, possibly even losing money, right? Because you might be pumping money into the wrong thing and it's not doing anything, or you're hiring the wrong people and you're not getting any gains because you don't understand the landscape yet, right? So the lower the learning curve, the better. Now, if you're, I don't know, Spanish, this might not be the place. If you're French, definitely, you know what I mean, not the place, right? So if you're Spanish, maybe you need to go to Equatorial Guinea. It's the only African country that speaks Spanish. You know what I mean? If you're French, then, maybe you need to go over on the west side of Africa and find the francophones or whatever, because then you're going to have a learning curve based on language, right? So the more of the learning curve that you can get rid of, if it's business focused, the better, because the faster you can get to business, the faster you can make money. If you're stuck in the learning curve, you're either losing money or you're just not making money in that learning curve until you're done. So that was important. We didn't have any time to waste. So we made sure that we chose the country that had essentially no learning curve at all. And you can look at that in the way that important industries treat professionals from that like country, right? And we do this all the time. We'll look at, if you're a registered nurse in that country and you want to come be a registered nurse in the United States, how is that perceived? What list are you on? Are you EB1? Are you EB2? Right? What are we looking at? And so with Kenya is actually the only country in East Africa where a registered nurse is a registered nurse in America, right? All the other countries, their nursing degree doesn't mean anything. They're not considered a nurse at all. They have to go back to school and do it again, right? Same thing with the doctors, right? So when you look at that, then you're like, okay, there's an educational parallel, right? So, okay, so we're good on that level. So we can step right in, and if we hire an MBA, we know that they're what we expect them to be as an MBA, right? You can go to some countries and someone's like, I have a business degree, and you hire them and you're like, this fucking guy doesn't know as much as my 2-year-old. How did he get a business degree, right? And so, to figuring out whether the education is on par is always one of the phases of our due diligence. And so, like I said, medical is typically the place that exposes it completely, because in medical, if you get it wrong, people die, right? So typically the rules around medical are right. They're not political, they're not whatever, they're correct, right? Because if you get it wrong, people die. And so this being the only country in the entire region whose medical professionals are one for one directly, accepted in the West, that tells you what's going on with the education, right? So there are little things you can do there are signs, you know what I mean? The little things you can do that'll give you the signs as to whether, the education is what you expect it to be, in throughout your due diligence and whatnot, right? Like when we were dealing with the Philippines, you could bring an RN over from the Philippines, but she would immediately be considered a new RN. Like all of her years of experience would not be counted right? Whereas a Kenyan RN just goes takes a test called the NCLEX, and then submits her results and her diploma or degree to the state board of nursing where she wants to be a nurse, and that's it. Right? You know, they'll do the nursing license. She pays her dues, and she's licensed. That's it, right? And so those are the kinds of things that you can do in legitimate due diligence to figure out what you're dealing with. You know, what kind of country you're dealing with. What are the, and that's if you are dealing with people where you need, professional, individuals with education. You don't always need that. Like if you're starting, I don't know, if you're starting a trash truck company, you know what I mean? You just need somebody with a CDL or their equivalent of a CDL license and guys who are willing to go pick up trash, right? Like you don't necessarily care if the education levels are on par, right? So it just depends on what kind of business you're actually doing as to whether that's important to you. So again, all of the things that made Kenya the best for me might not actually have any bearing or impact on the next person who's looking for a place to go. So there's that. It's not cheap. It's not cheap to come here, right? And so there's by it being prohibitively priced, there's certain elements that we don't run into, right? I'll give you a really good example. You go to Ghana or even Nigeria, you will run into like matatu buses or maxi buses or like these transportation vans essentially, blaring music, right? The same type of thing you experience in the hood, right? And places where like money is being made and generational wealth is being made, it's quiet so that people can think. And places where debt is being made, and in ghetto environments, it's incredibly loud, right? So that no one can think past the situation and get ahead, right? We all know that if you're black and you're from America and you're in the hood, you're hearing all kind of bass drops and all of that all day long, blaring, shaking your house windows, all kinds of foolishness, right? You'll run into that in Ghana. You'll run into that in Nigeria. I've never run into that in Kenya. It's not illegal. You can do it, right? I've just never, not once have I ever run into that in Kenya, right? Why? Because you can go to Ghana with next to nothing, right? You can go to Nigeria with next to nothing. You need a minimum $2,000 a month to come here, right? That's just a government standard, right? If you get around that $2,000 a month minimum in income, then you need to put up $100,000 cash, because now you're talking about coming as a business owner. So if you're coming as a business owner, you got to put up $100,000 cash to prove that you really are a business owner, not just somebody who set up an LLC in your basement, right? And so that actually creates an infrastructure and an atmosphere where numbnuts don't show up, which is incredible, right? So they're choosier than some of the other folks, where they're not really just letting any old body come up in here and do whatever. It's not like Colombia and Central and South America and all of that stuff, where all the riffraff are there, right? You don't run into that here. So it's very, very rare that there's a fight in the clubs. All the ghetto stuff. Very, very rare that any of the ghetto bullshit happens here, because they can't afford to come here. Not immigrating wise, maybe to visit, but that's it. And then they got to go. So that's cool that they're intentional about who can immigrate. They're intentional about making it prohibitively priced, so you only get people who are actually going to benefit society coming into the ecosystem, which is a beautiful thing, right? So that's another reason why we chose this one above all others. Now we only went to 34 countries, so there's 54. So there's some that we didn't see, but for the most part, none of them even came close to connecting with what we needed done the way that Kenya did. Mm, I don't know. Like, I dated when I came here, but it was like the end of my dating, right? Because then I found my wife, I got married, da 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 da. So, from a dating perspective, I thought it was pretty good. It's in my top three countries for dating in the world, for sure, right? So, as far as answering that question, I thought it was pretty good, but I dated here later in life when I was focused on finding a wife. I don't know what like the 20-year-old dating scene is when, if they're dating without intention and, whatever the case may be there. I don't know about that. So you might want to, find a younger guy and ask him about that. For guys who are ready, you're ready to get married, you're looking, uh, to find women of substance, right? Not everybody wants a woman of substance, but if you're looking for women of substance and you're ready to get married, this is a great place to do it. Said top three. What are the other two? Um, the other two places would be specifically because the whole country is not great in my opinion for this, but specifically Guangdong province, China. Guangdong specifically was really really good. I spent a few years in China. Could have easily got married there. So they were on point with it as well. Uh, and then I would say that the next really really good kind of dating experience was St. Lucia. If I had to get specific, I'd say Rodney Bay. But there's nothing about the experience when I was living there to lead me to believe that anything was any different anywhere else in St. Lucia. In China, the experience let me know absolutely it's different outside of Guangdong. But so yeah, those would be Kenya, Guangdong, China, St. Lucia were my best experiences. And again, it depends on what you're into. Like some guys actually like dumb girls, right? Like I'm not talking to those guys, right? But if you want a woman of substance, like a woman who can build a dynasty family, a woman who has some class, a woman who has some background, and all of that. Those three places were the places where I found that in abundance. And I'd say the honorable mention would be Nice, France. Definitely honorable mention. Yeah, yeah. I mean, so if you're going to have a family, then the important decision you're going to make is going to be who your mate is. It doesn't matter who's making the decision. So whether you're the woman, whether you're the man, whatever partner you are in the relationship, that's going to be the most important decision that you make if you're going to have a family, right? And so and for me, if you're making a family, it means you're having kids, right? Like if you're not having kids and you're just in a relationship, that's just from my point of view. So if you're making a family, it means you're bringing children into the mix from my point of view. So if that's the focus, then the relationship you choose is like one of the most important decisions that you're going to make in your entire life, right? And so it depends on the type of family that you're trying to create, you know. And so you have to kind of look accordingly. I think dating sucks so much in America because it's not done with any real purpose, right? Like people are still naively trying to just let love find them, and think that love is going to fix everything, and blah 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 blah, right? You can love, so many people throughout your lifetime. But if you have a plan, then there needs to be skills, there needs to be dispositions, that are important. There, you really kind of need to map out what it is you want out of life, and then go backwards from there, right? And so it's really the same as, and maybe this is why business people, you know, it seems like, anyway, maybe I just hang out with successful marriage people, but it seems like business people are so much more successful in their marriages because they know they wouldn't hire a CFO because they like them, even if they like them a lot, even if they would die for them. That doesn't make them qualified to be the CFO of the company. Right? They understand that. And so when they're trying to build a marriage, just like when they're trying to build a company, they hire the power players, they hire the A players, they hire the people who are built for that role, and they move forward in life with that. And so their marriages tend to last. Like, all of my peers, I don't have a business peer that has a divorce, and they all have like longer marriages than me. Like, mine is 7. They all like dwarf me. I think the next junior marriage is 12, something like that. None of them cheat. I wouldn't do business with somebody who cheats on their wife, or a woman who cheats on her husband, because that's the person that you supposedly love. That's the person that you go home to every day. And so if you lie to them and cheat on them, what will you do to your business partner? I ain't nobody. You know what I mean? I'm just somebody you're doing some business with. So why wouldn't you steal my money if you cheat on your husband, if you cheat on your wife? Why wouldn't you, do some backdoor nonsense with me if you would do all of that? So none of them cheat. None of them have divorces. None of them, have any of those issues. Um, and so I think it's the result of better decision making. And wherever and whenever we got to this, because we ain't been around very long. What is it, the 250th anniversary this year or something like that? It's not like America's been around forever. So I don't know when the this kind of fairy tale notion of like love will solve everything popped up, but that's definitely how people were proceeding in the U.S., and that's probably the problem. I don't know, maybe it's an unpopular opinion. I don't know. I don't poll people's opinions, but it's the answer to the question that you asked. So how about that? Well, yeah, that. Well, maybe you weren't here. We had a whole discussion about education and how we did due diligence to see where the education fit, and that the education here was equal to or superior to Western level education. And so, yeah, we don't have an issue with that. We are looking at creating a school, though, a really kind of education for next gen school, that will combine some of the best aspects of some of the best teaching methods. So international baccalaureate, Waldorf, a touch of Cambridge, not much. In the preschool phases, possibly Reggio Emilia, or a split between Reggio Emilia and Montessori, um, you know, and go from there, uh, with an African focus. And so we are slowly but surely. It's the kind of thing you want to get done right. So it's the kind of thing that you don't do fast. You do right. But we are really heavily looking into that. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can definitely send an email, um, and we can talk about that. So you can send an email, that just saying that you want to be you know in on the Pan African School, and then we can have a conversation. All right. Only entertaining like in cash investors at this point. So don't email me talking about you want to work there as a teacher. That's a long way off. So we're not. It doesn't make sense to even take applications for something like that. School might not be here for 4 years. That's the estimate that I'm looking at right now. So, not hiring anybody yet. But if you want to come in, or you're, a PhD or a PhD in education, or stuff like that, and you want to come on board, you can go ahead and send me an email. Well, so how do I explain this? It's exceedingly difficult to explain to people who aren't used to it. Uh, there are differences in households with wealth and households without wealth. All right. I've explained this before as far as who my father was and what he did and blah 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 blah, and the type of people he worked for. Where our household didn't have wealth, should have had wealth, but didn't, and he was an immigrant, and so the collegiate achievements that should have granted him a pathway to wealth were kind of wiped out by that same thing we were talking about, as far as like when you bring your education to the West, is it recognized? And so for him, it was not. But he could still obviously do the work, and that work was valuable to very wealthy people, and so he was hired by very wealthy people to do, what probably should have been extraordinarily profitable work for essentially pennies on the dollar, right? But this work required him to live with these people, so it was one of those things where, like, you're contracted to come out, do something, it's going to take 14 months. And in order for it to get done, you got to be there for the entire 14 months. We're like living at the pool house or in the guest house or like whatever. And luckily, none of these people were like crazy, because some are, right? But none of these people were like crazy. And they saw a kid as a kid. And the other thing is, in America, there's a point of no return with black boys. Black girls don't really experience this, but black boys, there's a point of no return where a black boy is cute and harmless until 1 year he's not, and then after that he might be shot by law enforcement, right? But up until then, he's relatively safe. And so, it was during kind of that phase where I was young enough that I was still cute and harmless. Um, and I would be privy to the conversations that happened, like with their kids, like they just had a bunch of kids in the room, right? They didn't have to do that. They could have been like, get that kid out of here. But that was beneficial to me, where I was able to absorb some of the dispositions that they were instilling in their kids because I was in the room, right? Um, Now it's very, very different in a household that has no wealth and doesn't understand how to build wealth, right? The way those households communicate are very different. And that's called habitus, right? So it's way more than I'm going to break down to you in one line, but you can definitely look it up, okay? There's decades of research. It's all sociology research that's built into it. And habitus creates dispositions, right? That's its primary function. And those dispositions allow you to move through certain circles, and move through life um, with confidence that allows you to maybe influence the way things work in those circles, right? Like, you have enough confidence that people just defer to you because you really seem like you know what you're doing, right? Whether you do or whether you don't, right? So back to that mate being the most important decision you ever made. Um, if you're going to try and build anything that lasts beyond you, you need somebody who understands that. Because if you're building somebody who has the confidence to actually run a multi-generational dynasty, and your partner is not speaking life into that child, your partner is, um, shattering the child's confidence, in the way that they're speaking to them, then you have a problem because it's not going to work out. Because most your initial habitus happens in a very kind of nonchalant way. It's not an active thing, and it doesn't work if you try to do it actively, which is where the difficulty comes in, because you have to make it a habit in yourself in order to transmit the habitus to your children, right? So that's where the problem comes in. If it's not a habit in yourself, then your kids will see the cracks. Anyone who's had kids knows what that is. Anyone who's had kids knows, when you drop something, you say shit, and the kids shit, shit, shit for the next 2 weeks. The kids shit, 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 right? Because the kid caught you slipping, right? So if it's not a legitimate discipline for you, you're going to transmit the slips. They're going to catch you slipping, right? So that's where the difficulty comes in actually transmitting the proper dispositions and transmitting the real habitus from a generation that's not a wealthy generation to a generation that's going to support generational wealth. That's why 70% of generational wealth families fail in the second generation. That's why we focus on teaching, those sociological theories and facts to our generational wealth clients so that they can be part of the 30% that maintains their generational wealth past the first generation. So that's always the hard part of generational wealth. And you can kind of tell, like when you got like a hard-headed kind of, loudmouth, gotta win, listening to respond instead of learn, like, kind of, they're not going to make it because they're not coachable. So they can't even learn the discipline necessary to create the habitus to start any kind of generational. And you see that with like stars that came from the hood or whatever, and they didn't even get past the first generation. They didn't even create generational wealth, right? Because they just didn't have the disposition to do it, right? And so it's absolutely, positively the hard part, and most people are just not even disciplined enough to do it. That's why generational wealth is already the elite. So even the 70% who fail were already elite to even get to that point, because that means that they actually developed the generational wealth in that first generation. So they're already elite, right? And then 70% of them fail because they can't transmit what they have to the kids, because you just cannot do it actively. If you have children and you think about what you transmitted them the most, it's the stuff that you didn't teach them. It's the stuff that they were watching you do when you didn't know that they were watching. That's what you've transmitted to them the most, right? The little attitude that they do that you're like, damn, they got that from me. No, you taught it to them. It wasn't in their genes. The eye roll wasn't in their genes. You taught it to them. They were watching you every time you did it, and you didn't see them watching, right? So that transmission teaches them the most, and it's the only way to transmit habitus. You cannot do it as an active class learning session, right? So if you ain't got it, you ain't got it, and you can't give it. So if that becomes the case, where you ain't got it and you want your kids to have it, then you have to hire people who have it, who can give it to them. And that's where the whole position of governess comes from, right? And that's why governesses have a very particular demeanor, because the whole point of the governess is that they understand the child is always watching. You make sure the child is stuck next to them at all times, right? And so the child doesn't catch your slips because you're not even there to slip in front of them. The governess is there, and the governess doesn't slip. She's professionally trained to pass on certain habitus to the children, right? So that's what a governess is. That's why a governess is not a nanny. That's why a governess is in charge of the nannies, right? So it's all about intention and about understanding that you might not be the best, fit to even pass that thing on. A lot of people would be in their ego and in their, now, this is my child, I'm the only one who can. Okay, go ahead and teach them poverty. If that's what your ego is telling you need to do, go listen to the ego. you know but logic and intention are going to give you different outcomes. So that's essentially it. People are always going to do whatever they're going to do. They're going to discipline themselves, then so be it. And you'll see it, right? You'll see it. Like not too long ago, I had a kidney stone, right? I didn't drink very much water. Doctor said drink more water so you don't get another kidney stone. What do you guys see every single live? 2-3 liters of water just in a couple of hours that we're talking to each other, right? Now, the ability to do that came as a result of the work I've done in self-discipline earlier. If I didn't have, and I don't have a lot of self-discipline, I'm that by far not tooting my own damn horn. So let's start there. But because I've done some discipline work, I'm able to do what I say I'm going to do and stick to it. Right? That's a skill. That's not just, something any old body can do. That's a skill that you build over time. Right? There are activities that you can place your kids in that will teach them that skill. Right? Not talking the classroom. There are things that you can do to transmit discipline and different aspects of discipline. There are things that you can do to transmit scholarship and different aspects of scholarship. There are things you can do to transmit thinking and different aspects of thinking. Right? So, whether you do them or not is up to you. You'll build the kind of family you deserve. Everyone does. You'll build the kind of family you deserve. So figure out what kind of family you deserve and go from there. Working backwards is always the easiest way to do it, but there are more than one way to skin a cat. So you can find a less efficient way and, whatever. It's fine. Sometimes people, learn better from the hard way. Whatever. Do what works for you. But working backward from the goal is typically the easiest way to get it done. It's simple. It's simple. It's not complicated. That doesn't make something easy. It's just simple, right? So, for example, if you were to pull a engine out of a car, right? That would be something that's simple to do. Pulling an engine out of a car is simple, all right? But it's not easy, right? It's simple. You just unhook everything attached to the engine of the car and pull it out. It's very simple. It's not complicated, right? Now, but it's not easy, right? You're going to need something that can carry, 1,000 pounds or half a ton or whatever that engine might weigh. You're going to need to make sure that fluids don't spill all over the place, and all of that. But it's not a complicated thing to do. That doesn't mean that it's not difficult, right? So simplicity doesn't equal easy. Just because something is simple doesn't mean it's easy. All you got to do is maintain discipline. All you got to do is do what you say you're going to do and not quit. It's very simple. It's not complicated, right? All you got to do is figure out your goals and work backwards from them and discipline yourself and focus on those goals, almost obsessively. That's it. It's quite simple. But that doesn't mean that it's not hard. You know what I mean? It does. Just because it's simple doesn't mean that it's easy. Those are those are different things. All right. Even a nuclear, reactor, it's quite simple. Right. That doesn't mean that it's easy. Right. To actually do it, very different thing. All right. E equals mc squared. Very, very simple. Multiplication, in fact. So if you light a piece of matter on fire, the energy is released, right? But it's multiplication. That means you should be able to take the energy and turn it into a log of wood, right? Very, very simple. Energy becomes matter, matter becomes energy. That doesn't mean that, it's not difficult for us to do. We don't have Star Trek replicators yet where we press a button and turn energy into chocolate cake. We should be able to. E equals mc squared. Quite simple. But just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. Right? So just because you hear things and you're like, oh man, the way you're saying it, man, it's simple. That doesn't mean there's no degree of difficulty in the implementation. It might be simple, but that doesn't mean it's easy. All right? Make sure that you understand that. Because the good news is that because it's simple, you can always find the end. So that's why working backwards is typically the most efficient way to do it, because it's simple. You can figure out what the end is and be like, all right, so success looks like this. Great. Now let's get into the difficulty part. Now let's figure out from success all the way to where I am, how do I get there? Now I work backwards from success. In order to be this, what would I need to change? What would I need to accomplish? And then go from there. And that's where the difficulty is going to set in. Y'all asked me some questions that took me well away from Kenya. No, it's all good. It's all good. No, they're actually ants. Remember, it was raining when we first started. So when it rains, the ants get wings, and then they fly all over the place, and it's So yeah, and they're not very good at flying because they don't always have wings. So they like fly into you. Yeah. We used to have the same thing though. I vaguely remember, like in Berks County, Pennsylvania, it rains and then ants get wings as well. I think we had the same thing in the U.S. In Philly, it's a different animal. There's not much nature running around. But I remember like being in Hawk Mountain or whatever, and it raining and like the ants getting wings and flying all over the place. Well, no, so that environmental habitus is part of it. I'm happy you brought me back. That I might have missed. I might have went off on a tangent. I apologize. So the environment teaches things as well, right? So like what I was just talking about, me remembering being in Hawk Mountain, hiking on the Appalachian Trail and like, camping and figuring out how to catch a rabbit, and then being taught how to gut it, and and having that kind of survival skill created additional confidence in me, dealing with the wild. Now, does that mean I was some survival expert? No. Right. Right. But it created additional confidence in that like arena, for me. So I had no problem walking off trails. I had no problem. So that led to me like mountain climbing and like rock climbing and like that type of stuff. And so it led on a certain path that most of my peers didn't go down, because my peers look into the dark woods and that's it. They're not going any further. Right. But because I knew how to do a half hitch and a square knot and things like that, there's a certain confidence that transmitted to me for me to continue down that path, and a certain level of independence. Now, that wouldn't be possible with my child if I was still in Philadelphia, right? I wouldn't be able to take my kid and be like, yeah, go play for 8 hours. Make sure you're back here before the street lights come on. Blah 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 blah. Hey, Ryan, how's it going? Right. So that's not a possibility, right? At the moment. So here, it is a possibility. So that environmental habitus, is something that I've been able to recapture by relocating here. So my kid will be able to go into the woods. They will be able to like leave at 9 in the morning, go to the beach all day, and come back at 8 at night, right before the street lights come on. And same as my parents, we didn't have no cell phones. I'm not some young kid. You know what I mean? When I was coming up, there was no such thing as a cell phone. All right, there was a mobile phone made by Motorola that you had to be a millionaire to have, and it was a bag with a battery the size of a brick that sat inside of like a Rolls Royce, right? And it was like a rotary dial, right? And so, we went out, played in the woods, played in the creek, turned over stones. There were crawfish underneath. Grabbed the crawfish, put them in a bucket, bring them home. Dirty as hell. And all of that. And couldn't nobody call to see where we were. Wasn't no GPS tracking, nothing like that, right? And we made it home every day. So we had a different level of independence. We had a different level of confidence just from play, right? Something that can't, happen in today's America, right? So, oh man, yeah, good to see you, man. Good to see you. But yeah, something that doesn't really happen. So this, relocation allowed my child to be in a position there where he can experience that. Not that cell phones are going to disappear, but he can go off and do his thing all day and come back, and we're confident that he'll make it back. We're in a country where there are no school shootings. We're in a country where the child abductions are, and we don't even hear about them, right? I'm sure they happen, but I haven't even heard about one in the 15 years that I've been coming here, right? And so it's just one of those things where it depends on what you want for your child. That's all. Yeah, yeah. And I mean, we our trustee company even works with Kenyans that have left, that live in America, that live in Canada, that live in the UK, whatever. There might be a school shooting at the school where their kids are. Maybe one of their kids' best friends isn't with us anymore, and they're like, you know what? Let me send my kid to school in Kenya. And so then we'll do like a trust fund, an educational trust to pay for like the kids' boarding school and all that. We'll pick them up at the airport, make sure they have not just all of their stuff squared away, but they also have somebody like they can call, 24-hour hotline and see what's going on. If they get hurt, the school takes them to the hospital. One of our people go there and sit with them or whatever, contact the parents and all of that stuff. So, those things are important too. But yeah, happens all the time. We have, a bunch of Kenyans that, don't live in Kenya anymore, and like it's dangerous for their kids. Their kids' lives are literally in danger, where they are. So they just pull their kids out of that system and send them back, which I would do the same thing. I don't blame them at all. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Environmental education, essentially. yeah, I mean, that's essentially it. All right. Any other questions about anything? This is really an open Q&A since it's probably the last one. Probably the last one. I think we're going to be filming the show tomorrow, and then there'll be a YouTube premiere, and then that'll be the format moving forward. So, any other Q&A questions before you don't really get the chance to do Q&A with me anymore? All right, looks like we're good. All right, guys, thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for being here all the weeks that we did this every single day. And now we're gonna switch to a different format that can focus in on each topic and kind of give you a library slash compendium of all the information that you guys are looking for in a smaller format. Even here, we've been here for 1 hour and 12 minutes. And so the show will be much smaller, but they'll be focused on one thing. So we will move forward from there, and we'll see you, in the clips on these short form content social media platforms like TikTok, and the entire full episodes will be available on YouTube and Fanbase, I believe. All right, have a good one, guys. Thanks for hanging out with me. See you guys soon.